Hiya, it is Talking Reds. I'm Josh Sexton, joined today by Fuad Hasan on this Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning. That's when Talking Reds happens. Who knows what day or date it is these days. We're going to have a bit of a chat today about some reports that will come out in the Telegraph. Two reports in particular. The first about Pep Lijnders. Fuad, I'll read through a bit of this. So the headline of this piece is how Pep Lijnders' influence has grown at Liverpool following Anfield power shift. Jurgen Klopp's number two is playing an increasingly important role in Liverpool's transfer business by Sam Wallace. So before we sort of dig into this further, I think, to be honest, I could have sort of seen that coming. We've obviously seen Pep Lijnders doing more of the League Cup press conferences, the FA Cup press conferences too. It's just felt like over maybe a couple of years now. And I think given the initial deal that Jurgen Klopp signed in particular, that this back end was always going to be sort of Jurgen Klopp, I guess, succession planning, not only for the club but for himself. And I think Pep Lijnders is a major part of Klopp's vision for the future of the club.
100%, and I think it goes all the way back to Jurgen kind of bringing him back to Liverpool after he tries and goes and takes on a managerial job in Holland. And I'm sure part of the sell of that and the talk of that, obviously he was working with Jurgen, but that growing in terms of influence and stature within the club. And I think he's been here for so long as well. That's important to remember. He's been here since before Klopp. He's sort of seen how everything works and worked with a lot of those people that we credit with doing so much good in the last few years, like Michael Edwards, like other people in that scouting department. So the experience has been built. He's got all of that, and he's got one of the best managers in the world to work off. And I think we've got to be careful, because I think obviously yes, there is an increase in his influence, but at the end of the day, Jurgen is the manager. The final decision does rest with him, like it always has done. And I think that will, obviously that will continue. I think we have to be careful not to overplay his importance as well.
Yeah, I think this piece comes off the back of a comment made by Jamie Carragher on Monday Night Football, in which he said, I don't know if there's an influence from Pep Lijnders, who is Jurgen Klopp's number two, who has a huge influence on what goes on. Maybe a Dutch way of thinking, getting players on the ball. So Sam Wallace expands on that. Said certainly Lijnders has been a major part in key decisions at Liverpool. Goes into a bit of his background. He says, as the recruitment picture has changed at Liverpool, so Lijnders' influence on that side of the club has grown exponentially. The technical director Michael Edwards signalled his independent departure in November 2021, and his successor Julian Ward is now working his notice. And then he goes in to talk about some of the signings that Lijnders has also apparently had a big influence on. I think this is, as you say, this is probably where we need to be careful, because there'll be some sort of, I guess, conspiracists among Liverpool supporters, which we know there are one or two at the very least, who will look into this and say, oh well, the reason that Julian Ward and the reason that Michael Edwards wanted to leave is because someone else is basically getting all the say, and they're getting no credit, and they're just having the title by name and that kind of thing. And to me, this piece doesn't read like that. To me, this piece reads like the club have been looking around for a few signings. Pep Lijnders has gone, these lads look all right, and then it's been somebody's job, maybe Michael Edwards, maybe Julian Ward, to go and find out more about these players, to go and make sure these players are suited. I can't see a world in which, in one of the biggest clubs in world football, this manager is going, can we go and sign him? And they're just going, yeah, and that's it basically.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's something that we've applauded over the years, haven't we, in terms of how Liverpool operated in the transfer market and how Jurgen has led that group, because I think the important thing to remember is it is a group, not just in terms of going out and doing the technical aspects of getting a deal across the line. It's a group work, a group so dynamic in terms of finding players, making their case for players. Mo Salah, Michael Edwards can take the credit for really pushing that one. Obviously, like I said before, the final decision is Jurgen's, but he has created a system and a structure where he is open to ideas and is wanting everyone in his this transfer team, to bring people to the table, to suggest ideas and make cases. And that's his greatest strength as a leader, isn't it? In welcoming other opinions and encouraging people to take that responsibility. So I think it's not just Pep Lijnders. It's never just been Jurgen Klopp in the past. It's always been this group that have done decisions. And I get it. One of the slightly worrying things is sort of the idea of that transition almost that we're seeing behind the scenes. We're talking about on the pitch, the transition that's been happening with this team, but there is quietly a transition happening in the background off the pitch, and that naturally is going to be a bit worrying, because these guys have been at the centre of a recruitment team that have been absolutely acclaimed all over Europe in terms of how they've been able to buy players, how they've been able to spot talent. So losing a few key members of that really quickly is a bit of a worrying sign, and I just hope they will keep that system going, and that we will get people in to sort of replace those roles, because I think it's nice having that off the pitch team that can sort of independently go and and work out players and things like that. You don't want just the manager and the assistant being the ones that are identifying players. You want this little group dynamic that they've created, because that's the way modern football seems to be going.
100%. I'm just reading through some of the comments here. Jono says Twitter is crazy right now over this news. The hate on Lijnders is ridiculous. And this is where, again, I think people need to be careful. And it goes back to what you said before, Fuad, is that, it's not like Pep Lijnders has come back from his spell in Holland and infiltrated Liverpool from the inside out. And it's this big master plan to make himself the Liverpool manager. He's ultimately being backed by the Liverpool manager. As you say, Jurgen Klopp still has the final decision on basically, most of these sort of things. Certainly on anything Pep Lijnders does, I imagine, because he's literally his right-hand man. He's part of his team. So if we're starting to blame Pep Lijnders for decisions that are being made at the club, particularly if we're blaming him for a few sort of, recruitment people leaving, then I think we need to look in sort of different areas and at different parts of the club, because assuming that one man is solely responsible for all of that, again, it sort of does down all the great work that has been done at the club.
100%. And, in that article that they talk about the sort of his Portuguese influence and how they've been looking towards that league, and that's normal. That happens all over football. Pep Guardiola has done that with South American leagues, and the list goes on in terms of managers around Europe. And I think they have brought in staff as well that have that are probably not equally, but have a say in these sort of decisions. Vito Matos, from everything you hear, is a very sort of liked and influential figure behind the scenes as well. So that there still is a collective. It's not, even if Pep Lijnders is pushing things, he does have a network. He does have his own sort of team with Jurgen that are able to sort of identify people and push things. And I think it's just very important to remember that it does always go back to Jurgen. And if he's given his yes, that means he's fully behind the idea. So it's not someone else pushing something above him. It is him at the end of the day. Yeah,
I'm reading through a few more of these. There's pandemonium in the comments, I won't lie. Lee Martindale says Pep Lijnders Pep's influence is indeed growing within the club. It's not bringing anything positive to the current situation, quite the contrary, actually. There's a lot of FSG outing going on. David LFC chats, did any of you buy the book Intensity? I think there's been a few people who've sort of blamed the book for Liverpool maybe being a bit figured out tactically. I guess that would be one of my worries. Not necessarily that the book has exposed Liverpool tactically, because I think that it's pretty clear that if Liverpool are going to release a book, they're going to make sure it doesn't tap into the sort of the inner sanctum of everything and give away any secrets. They're going to make sure that the secrets they have are years ahead of what is in the book. I guess the concern would be for me that we've seen this style of football sort of change from Liverpool, and change it in quite a sort of drastic way, I guess, over the last particularly 12 months, or maybe even a little bit less time than that. And my worry would be how much of an influence Pep Lijnders has had on that, and Liverpool moving to a bit more of an attacking style of football again, because I think what Liverpool did so well in the seasons where they were really challenging up there for the league title, which I hasten to add was also last season. But what they've done so well throughout the season when building that consistency is making sure they were solid at the back and building off the foundation of that. I worry that maybe we've gone away from that a little bit, and that will be where I would question Pep Lijnders as an attacking coach, his influence on that.
Yeah, no, that I totally see that, and I think it kind of goes back to the identity of this side a bit. And I feel like we were able to really sort of pinpoint and talk about clearly what a Jurgen Klopp's team attacking move is, or what a Jurgen Klopp goal looks like for this Liverpool side. And I think those sorts of bits of play seem to be more blurred these days. I think the role of the midfield is almost caught in two minds, where there's still obviously loads of the functional stuff that needs to be done from this Liverpool side that we saw in 18, 19, 19, 20, but then also this sort of added dynamic of a bit more creativity and playing on the ball. And it is a funny one, because I remember if we go back to 18, 19, 19, 20, when this Liverpool side was absolutely flying and probably the best side in Europe, there were still calls from people all over the place about, well, this midfield needs a bit more creativity, it needs a bit more this and that. So it does show you can't really have it all, and I think they've tried to address that. They try to bring in players, and I'm sure they'll hold their hands up and sort of say themselves that maybe they haven't been the best in terms of planning how this midfield is supposed to take shape seamlessly. I think that's a big thing. I think now what we're going to see is probably a very clear and obvious change, which they were trying to sort of negate in the forward line. You could clearly see by bringing these players in slowly that they were going to slowly make that transition and hopefully not have it impact on the pitch too much. But I feel like now they're probably at a stage where this midfield really does need a proper revamp, and one that might need its own time when the players do come in, because they will come in, they will invest, they will bring in people. it's going to need a little bit of time again, I think, to sort of gel and to go the way they want. And that's where I have a bit of sympathy. I feel like that personnel-wise, they have been unlucky with injuries and people being missing. But then also equally, I look at some of the decisions, the likes of Naby Keita and players like that who, have been fit, and not seeing them play, it sort of feels a bit weird to me, and sort of makes me question, well, why are we keeping these players? Why do we still have them around if they're not coming into a situation where you don't have any lads to play in midfield? So there's not one thing to blame. I think it's a mixture of things that have all come at once.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Naby Keita absence against Brentford on Monday night, was that? Honestly, I'm losing track of the days, genuinely. Questions about midfield, questions about planning. Here's a clip from the second look discussing all of that.
For me, it's they get so many warnings. They're behind and they're getting warnings leading up to the second goal. And the manager's furious about the second goal. We'll come on to that in a second. But for me, though, the warnings are just there, full stop. I was genuinely surprised by the team selection. I thought the purpose of playing Elliott against Leicester was the idea that you'd have Keita fully available for the one coming up against Brentford. But I also think all season we've been doing this thing where we've been looking after a few players, starting a little bit weaker, and then needing to give players 45 minutes anyway. And, surely you know what Brentford are going to be like. Surely you want to start as strong as you can and then make your subs around tactical issues, sports science issues, make them having started as strong as you can. That's what I can't understand.
100%, and making 3 subs at half time, I know one of them was an injury, but making 3 subs at half time suggests you got your starting lineup wrong, wouldn't it? And that is a frustration, and I think, as you say, the biggest frustration from a supporter point of view is that we could probably see that before the game, that wasn't the right selection. Whether he's forced into what he's done with Elliott over Henderson, we don't know. I can't remember many times that Henderson, Fabinho and Thiago have played together this year, and it feels that feels in itself a bit strange. It's massively frustrating, and I think the other thing that I took away from it was, it's been mentioned quite a lot, but the lack of intensity. I think that's purely down to the lack of Andy Robertson. I think more than anyone this season, he's been our most intense player. Going back to the Villa game the other week, he was the one you looked at and thought, wow, he's on it, and he's rallying the troops, and you see that when he comes on.
But if you can do 45, you can probably do 55 at the very least. But also, can't we just have him for the first 45? I know he went off with the knock. But this is where I just end up being just a little bit bemused, and you see the team selection coming and you can feel as though Chamberlain's forced into it and he scores and he's been all right. But there's these 2 big dangling red arrows over the heads of Elliott and Shimmercast, and that might sound really harsh, but for me, that's where I'm just sort of going, the lad, what he ends up doing at half time, just do it in the first place.
I know. It's sort of rotating when you don't, we don't need to rotate, we need 3 points. So if you're sitting pretty at the top of the league and you've got big games in the Champions League coming up, or you've got things going on that you need to really rotate and look after players, I get it. But when you just need points on the board, just get the points on the board and then rotate after that.
YouTube, press the button, become a member of the Anfield Wrap from the heart of the city of Liverpool. The best way to enjoy all your Liverpool-based videos, everything you need, every single day. It is the Anfield Wrap.
Clip from the second look reacting to Brentford. If you want more therapy off the back of the Brentford game, there are lots of reaction on the Anfield Wrap from us. Download the Anfield Wrap app, you'll get free tokens to listen to the content, and if you want to subscribe, if you want to give us some of your money to listen to even more of that content, and there's quite a few things being recorded today and in the build up towards. There's a gutter show being recorded today, which is our transfer show, looking at all the latest Liverpool transfer rumours. We imagine, Fuad, there's going to be quite a lot of chat about Matheus Nunes in this, because in the same piece from Sam Wallace and in reports from the other day, to be fair, he's basically saying that we're all but looking to sign Matheus Nunes in the summer. It's quite funny within this piece, because he's clearly sort of trying to signal that Pep Lijnders' influence may not be a good thing, and he's like, the club are prepared to return to summer target Matheus Nunes, the Portugal international, as if that's like the gotcha moment. But I guess it's a good thing in the sense, we've all been thinking that Liverpool need a midfielder. We've seen clearly from Liverpool's midfield options, dwindling over the course of this season in particular. There's injury issues there, there's availability issues there. So signing somebody who has been appearing so regularly for Wolves, I can't claim to have watched much of him for Wolves, to be honest, but it seems like the club have still had their eye on him now that he's been here. Maybe he poses less of a risk. The money is still not bad. £44 million is a sort of rumoured fee, so it feels like it's potentially a no-brainer.
It seems to make sense. There were quite a lot of noise about it in the summer, wasn't there? I think Man City as well were quite interested, and Guardiola was talking about him then as well. So he's obviously a player, and I think him coming over and the money not changing too much will be key to that, because I think if you I think Wolves signed him for 35, 36 million, something like that. So if he'd have come and set the world on fire and that price triples, then it might be a different question. I think they're probably they're probably reeling a little bit, because you've heard now for a few times that they sort of a bit they sort of regret missing out on a couple of these players. I think Bruno Guimaraes is another one which they sort of are looking at why they didn't really make a move for earlier on. So he would fit the profile of what we need, I think, in that area. But I think we're in a position where that's not going to be enough at this stage. We're going to need players to do different roles in that midfield, and need players of a certain age as well in that area.
Yeah, it still indicates in this piece there's obviously hope. So we signed Jude Bellingham.
Yeah.
There's the obvious sort of obstacles in the way of that. I guess one of the strange things about the Núñez sort of interest from last summer, from going into this summer, is that I guess it shows Liverpool's lack of wanting to take a risk as a football club. It's clear that Núñez was available last summer in the Wolves, as you say, got him for a relatively cheap fee. It feels like the club didn't want to pull the trigger at the time, where they had some doubts about him. So I would ask the question to the club now of what they think that he's shown at Wolves that eliminates those doubts. Whether it's just him coming and getting a season in the Premier League under his belt and then being sort of more sure, and the fee still being quite low. But I'd quite like to see Liverpool just taking a few more risks on those kind of players before they go and sign for a Wolves, or as you say, Guimaraes at Newcastle. I'd like to see Liverpool just going and being really decisive in the transfer market.
Well, that's what we've grown used to seeing. So this feels a little bit weird, and it feels a little bit weird it coming out before it sort of happened as well, because we've been so used to them just striking and then hearing about it. It would be interesting to know what the kind of element of risk and how much of that has played a factor in how they've moved in the summer, because obviously they go and get Darwin Núñez and they spend big money on him, but was that the only move that they could really make? Was it sort of one or the other? And I think that's probably the slight internal kind of conflict or internal debate that what do we need, because we're at a stage where you talk about when you're your squad's at a certain stage, it's about adding one or two every year of a high profile and 70-80 million pound player. But I think Liverpool are also in that phase where they do need numbers in areas, and they especially will need numbers in the summer when a few players are out of contract. So there's a bit of a double kind of job needed there, and I think which is probably why we've heard things about ownerships and investment and things like that, because it is going to need a lot of that.
Absolutely, yeah. There'll be more transfer chat on the Anfield Wrap to come today. As I mentioned before, a gutter will be recorded today, which is our transfer rumours show. That'll be out on Tour Player, so download the Anfield Wrap app to get that, to get all your reaction to the Brentford game, to get all your build up to Wolves, hoping for a win at the weekend, hoping to see Cody Gakpo as well. That would be exciting enough for us up the Reds.